On your Thursday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Toronto Raptors are back in action tonight against the Pelicans. 23 games to go for the playoff push, and we're playing everyone's favorite Locked On Raptors parlor game. What's more likely? Vivek Jacob is along. We'll talk about the standings, we'll talk about the Raptors defense, and we'll talk about the big picture questions that lay ahead. All coming up on today's episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks so much for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1347 of Locked On Raptors for Thursday, February the 23rd. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. Been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Twitter at WoodleySean. You can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast for free on your favorite podcast apps. And of course, we are on YouTube. Please go hit the big red subscribe button over on the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel to help support the show. We're pushing towards 3,000 subs. It would be lovely if we could get there in the next couple of weeks here. Thanks to all those who have jumped in and joined our little Locked On Raptors family of late, and always looking for new submissions. All right, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right, let's get to it. It's everyone's favorite parlor game. What's more likely? And we ask our guest, Vivek Jacob, before we get to the Raptors, what's more likely? What's more likely, Vivek? Are you going to go outside or stay indoors all day with this nastiness outside?
Well, I'm going to have no choice come game time. I'm going to have to head to
that's
the arena.
right.
Yeah.
The plight of being a credentialed media member, not my problem this year. I get to cuddle up and be in the fetal position on the couch all day long.
I did skip practice yesterday, though. I went on Tuesday, and then when they said practice was going to be at around 5 p.m. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna stay home.
That's dinner time. Can't do it. Sorry, it's where my appetite really kicks in. I guess that's kind of an early bird dinner time. It's like the Swiss Chalet golden hour. Swiss Chalet, sponsor of the podcast, would you? All right, let's get to it, Big V. We're playing What's More Likely today, everyone's favorite parlor game that we play here on the show. It's pretty simple. I give 2 equally probably unlikely situations. We got to determine what the most likely of the 2 to come to fruition is over the next 23 games and into the offseason for your Toronto Raptors, who enter action tonight against the Pelicans at 28-31, 10th in the Eastern Conference, but of course sporting Jakob Poeltl, a real live big man, to tie it all together. Looked pretty good in that last game before the break. We shall see tonight if that carries over. Let's get into it, shall we? First one, what's more likely? The Toronto Raptors finish with the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, or they finish 11th or worse. Big V, what say you? Are they going to get to that 6th seed? Fred VanVleet talked about it yesterday. 4.5 games to go, 23 games to play. They think they can do it. They might, on paper, be one of the best contenders to get there as it stands right now, with the Nets having their roster depleted and the Heat having to rely on almost exclusively undrafted weirdos, all on down the line. The Hawks just fired their coach. Of course, they are closer to the 11th seed than they are to the 6th seed right now, so that one's in play as well. What do you got here? What's more likely, the 6th seed or 11th or lower? Big V.
I think 11th or lower is more likely.
Okay.
I think the Raptors, Kirthika tweeted this out last night, that the Raptors have the 3rd most difficult strength of schedule remaining. And I think when you look at the games coming up, when you look at how much they'd have to catch up to get to a New York or a Brooklyn, I think 11th is more likely. I mean, the likeliest scenario is that they finish, 8th, 9th, 10th, somewhere in there.
That's the point of the game, baby.
But choosing between 6 and 11, I'll go 11 or lower.
Interesting. I think I am going to say the 6th seed is more likely. Again, I don't think it's terribly likely that they get there. Maybe it's like a 15 percentile outcome, but I kind of think they're like preordained to get into the play-in right now. I don't really see them dropping back. The Bulls stink. The Raptors have a couple of games on them in the loss column, and I don't think Patrick Beverley is changing their life in any sort of notable way to close the season. And while the Raptors have a difficult schedule on paper, I always struggle with this because you get to the back part of the season, and how much are the teams you're playing caring? The final week of the season, they play Boston, then Milwaukee. It's possible the 1 seed is still up for grabs, and those teams are duking it out, with the Raptors being the team that is sort of determining who's going to be the 1 seed as those teams maybe go down to the wire. But I think it's just as likely that it's solved by that final week, and you're not seeing Milwaukee play their best guys in that final game on Sunday. You're not seeing Boston go full out for those last games in that last week. And then they play a lot of good teams, but they also play a lot of really stinky teams. Like, they play Charlotte twice more. They have Washington a couple times still on the schedule. I know Washington is technically ahead of them in the standings right now, but if you don't think the Raptors with Jakob Poeltl are a more talented and better team than what the Wizards are, then I don't really get it. They got Detroit a couple times.
Been the problem for Toronto all season, right?
Yeah,
that's
true.
What it's about.
Yeah, and I guess my thinking in 6th being more likely here is just a belief that Jakob Poeltl does in fact fix a lot of the problems that have been ongoing all year. And we've seen in a very short amount of time that he does in fact address a lot of those problems, and the team has a chance to make a lot more sense around him. What to you, Big V, is the biggest obstacle to overcome in terms of the Raptors getting this thing on the rails to the point where they can track down that 6th seed? Is there a potential flaw in their rotations that they're going to be rolling out here? Is it the chemistry side of things maybe having this thing all come undone? Is it just the mere fact that they have a bunch of teams to jump? Is there another team in front of them that you think is maybe a little bit more potent right now? Are the Hawks going to go on a post-Nate McMillan bump run? What to you is the biggest inhibitor of the Raptors tracking down that 6th seed?
Their overall lack of consistency this season. I think every time you've thought, oh, they've won a couple games here, maybe they can get on a roll. Oh, this was a big win in New York where Pascal dropped 52. Maybe this will be the turning point. Every single time there's been an opportunity to look and say, hey, they've turned a corner here. They've had this, disparaging, disappointing, crippling loss that takes them back off the rails again. So until I see them win 5, 6 in a row, I'm going to struggle to believe that they can actually catch up with somebody, right? Let alone actually, look like they could do some damage in the playoffs. So I think that's the part where I struggle to see them being anything more than an 8, 9, 10 seed. And again, so that's why choosing between 6 and 11, I'll go 11.
Yeah, that makes sense. I honestly think the biggest obstacle here is just the fact that the teams they play left on the schedule are not the teams in front of them. Obviously, they have Washington 3 times, so that's helpful, but they don't play Atlanta again. They don't play the Knicks again. They don't play the Nets again. They have just 1 game left against Miami. And so when you're not getting those sort of 2 games in 1 type results against those teams, you're really kind of looking for help elsewhere. And look, they might get it. I don't think the Heat are any sort of bear of a team right now. They're pretty thin and relying on a lot of dudes who are just maybe not all that reliable. The Knicks, I think, are just a pretty fine, run-of-the-mill, average good team. People know my thoughts on the Hawks. I think the Hawks are giant frauds. And so, I don't think it's a murderer's row of teams they're trying to track down, but only 23 games, not having the benefit of picking up extra ground in those games against those opponents, I do think that's probably going to come back and hurt them in their pursuit for the 6th seed. But I do think 7th, 8th, that should be the goal at the very least. And I think that's totally reasonable. Does that set you up for a first round matchup with the Bucks or Celtics? Yes, but again, the play-in has value, and getting playoff reps against very good teams also has value. So you can see what you got to do to not be the doormat of the Eastern Conference, I suppose, and just get a
home court in the play-in, baby. That's the dream.
That would be, I think, very fun. Everyone would have a very good time. I'm promising you. Yeah, just last one here. Like, if you had to predict a record, I think, what is there? 28 and 31. They got 23 games left. What would you just ballpark if you had to just gun to your head? You have to pick a record that the Raptors finish with, and you have to be right. Otherwise, maybe it's not gun to your head, but they take away your subscription to watch cricket.
I am currently watching the India-Australia Women's World Cup semifinal. India is down bad, but we don't need to talk about that. I will go with, like 42 and 40, maybe 43 and 39.
So that's 14 and 9 at sort of a top out record. Yeah, I think that is pretty reasonable. I think they're finishing over 500, man. I really do. Maybe I'm too Jakob Poeltl-pilled. I'm Jakob pilled, but Jakob Poeltl? I don't know.
No, but this is where, like, if you're gonna get that 6 seed, you're probably looking at like 46 plus.
Yeah, right? Like, you're gonna have to. I think 16 and 7 is the number for me. Like, if you can get to 44 wins, that might get you in there. It's going to be tough. You got a lot of ground to make up. The Nets had a bunch of wins banked from when they had Kevin Durant on their team. It's very, very valuable wins at this point. But yeah, I think the 6th still feels more likely than 11th. Dropping back, the Bulls are just not good and are really depressing in a way that makes the Raptors' plight seem like nothing. And so,
Pat Bev is coming for you.
Yeah, Pat Bev sure is coming. Not in the slightest worried about that.
Remember, no one cares more about the play-in than Pat Bev.
This is true. He is play-in royalty. He'll probably track down the Wizards instead, who I know, everyone's all happy about Bradley Beal of late and Kristaps Porzingis, but that team stinks, said the man covering the team. It's one spot behind them in the standings. We're going to continue on here, get into our second What's More Likely of the day. Before we do that, however, we got to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and the midway point of the NBA season is here, and it's the perfect time to download FanDuel because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to three-pointers drained, and you can even combine your bets for a chance to win an even bigger payout with a same-game parlay. That's a ton of fun. Maybe you're watching the Raptors tonight. Maybe you're like me. I don't tend to really partake all that often when it comes to sports betting, but when I do, it's because I'm at the game and I want to get the in-person experience and, beef up the in-person experience a little bit. And FanDuel can be a great way to do that. I was at a Raptors game with my cousin just a couple of weeks ago, and he won same-game parlay with a Scottie Barnes late-game steal that put him over his number. That's very exciting stuff. Go check out FanDuel right now. Don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, we continue on here as Vivek Jacob goes full Kermit the Frog with that water bottle coming out of the break. Let's get to our second What's More Likely of the day, shall we? This one, what's more likely, Big V? The Raptors' defense is top 10 from here to the end of the season, or the Raptors' offense is bottom 10 from here to the end of the season. Just some context, the Raptors' offense on the season per NBA.com is 11th in the NBA at a 114.6 offensive rating. They are 1.8 points shy of being in the bottom 10 of the NBA as it stands right now. The defense, 17th in the NBA right now at 113.8 defensive rating. That puts them, just quick math on the fly here, 1.2 points out of the top 10 on the season. So it's very clustered in this middle part of the offensive and defensive ranking charts, and very small sample. Anything can kind of be skewed. One or two big games one way or the other can certainly alter these numbers. But I'm curious, Big V, what do you think is more likely? A top 10 defense from here on out, or the offense regressing back with perhaps a little bit less spacing, with a non-shooting center in the middle of the floor, and maybe a rearing of the three-point issues that have dogged this team for a long time? I think that's probably the formula for this to be a bottom 10 offense. What say you? What is the more likely of these two outcomes?
I'm going to have to just buy into the defense.
Yeah.
Just because the offense has, statistically been good, even though I don't think the eye test matches what we've seen in terms of, the rating per 100% possessions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, if this was a question of just the half court offense, I might have a different answer for you. But
Sure.
uh, but yeah, I think defensively, when you look at the health coming back for this team, especially OG Anunoby, and him not having to, uh, defend centers anymore, Scottie not
Mm-hmm.
having to defend centers anymore, the pressure that kind of takes off. I think I will go with the defense.
Yeah, I think this one's honestly kind of easy. I think a top 10 defense is very much on the table for this team with Jakob Poeltl in tow. I know it's been a nightmare all season long. I know the defensive scheme has been too aggressive and too reckless and leaves them too exposed on the back end far too often. But that mostly took place in a world where Jakob Poeltl was not on the Toronto Raptors. And I think what he's going to bring now that they've had the All-Star break, some practice time to incorporate a little bit more stuff, perhaps diversify the ways they can use him in drop, bring him up to the level of the screen, whatever it is. Like, he can do all of that. He's better in drop for sure, but he showed in his first few games with the Raptors back in, stint number 2 here that he is able to, meander out a little further out to the perimeter. It's not always going to be great, but the things he does are still so valuable. Even if they're using him in sort of like a less than ideal fashion, he's still going to clean up so many of the messes the Raptors create with their defense that I think they have a shot at being a very good defensive unit, especially now you have potentially Gary Trent Jr. moving to the bench. I think that's sort of the consensus idea here is Fred, OG, Scottie, Pascal, Yak will be the starting 5. And that takes away one of your weak links when it comes to perimeter defense in Gary Trent Jr. It obviously you incorporate OG in there, and he has the back line defense of a Jakob Poeltl. They help rim protection of Pascal Siakam. And I know Scottie Barnes and Fred VanVleet have had their issues on the perimeter this season, but I do think Jakob Poeltl being there to kind of make it so those mistakes are less glaring and less damaging when they do happen, I think it will do a really good job of tying this whole thing together. And, maybe again, I'm just too Jakob Poeltl pilled, and I'm just looking at a couple of games against not very good competition and saying, look, he fixed everything. Everything's good now, but on paper, logically thinking about it, this has been a team that has performed above its, sort of eye test. It's had good numbers or sort of decent to average underlying metrics all season long. It stands to reason that you address the one big glaring issue that everyone agrees was the biggest glaring issue on the team, and it could really help sort out a lot of the problems. And I think the trickle-down effects of Jakob Poeltl are going to be pretty substantial. What's your read on the offense right now? I think we're both pretty bullish on it not falling into the bottom 10 over the final 23 games here, just because they have had pretty good results so far this year. They do a good job of the margins. Obviously, the offensive rebounding of late's been pretty aggressive. They, we know when they like to run, they're really good when they get out in transition. What is your read on the offense and sort of how Jakob Poeltl ties it all together? I have, I think there's enough going on where, yes, the spacing might be a little bit cramped, but they have enough intelligent basketball players to make it work. What are your thoughts on their ability to maneuver around the lack of shooting, especially in that Pascal, Scottie, Jakob Poeltl front court?
Yeah, I've been encouraged by what I've seen. I think what Jakob provides as a screener and as a playmaker has been very valuable to this team. I think the offense is definitely going to be better than it has been. The half court offense is going to be better than it has been up to this point in this season. I still have questions with regard to the big picture and having, a Jakob, Scottie, Pascal front court having an offense that's good enough to one day win a championship, or at least, be a legitimate contender. But I do have enough confidence in this group to be better than what they've been up to this point this season.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think Pascal Siakam bombing threes away the way he had just before the All-Star break, pretty valuable, obviously, in making this all work. Scottie's been more eager to put them up, if not more accurate. And I think Jakob Poeltl as this sort of dude off of whom you can kind of plan a lot of your offensive actions and have his screening really open up a lot of space for guys to get a little bit more downhill. His playmaking, obviously, we haven't really seen him run a ton from the elbows. I like the idea of like running 2-man games with him and Fred VanVleet or Gary Trent Jr. coming around screens and coming down those handoffs. Like I think there is a lot of different stuff they can kind of explore with Yak's passing to, alleviate the concern of having 3 non-great shooters across the front court. He's so good at making space when there is no space, navigating, seeping into the right pockets where he's able to be an outlet and offer, a cleaner laneway to the basket or whatever for the guys who are driving. I also think just the existence of pick and roll with this team. We saw in that last game, especially before the All-Star break with the Magic, that Fred Yak pick and roll combination, that's real. Like, that's a thing. Fred has not had an actual big man target to throw to his entire career with the Raptors, it seems. Jakob Poeltl's the best rolling big man the Raptors have had probably since Jonas Valanciunas. Like, that's notable. And so I think just adding those sort of like pet plays where you can get to easy offense and know exactly sort of the flow of possessions. There's not this standing around like wondering who's initiating. It's going to flow through one of Fred, Pascal, or Scottie. Yak's going to be involved a lot of the time. I think that's going to give the offense a lot of direction and allow them to perform pretty well. Do you think there's a world in which they finish top 10 in both offense and defense between now and the end of the season?
Yes, I think so. I think that ceiling, that theoretical ceiling, has always been there for this team.
Yeah, I've said it all along. There's a good team in here somewhere, and perhaps you just needed Jakob Poeltl to dig it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the balance of play, I don't think that'll be how it shakes out. I think, defensively, there's been too many lapses. And again, when going back to the point about consistency, that's where it all starts, right? Are you consistent in your defensive habits? And that's where I don't think they'll have enough to be a top 10 defense, but I could see them getting up to at least league average, which would be also an improvement. And
certainly,
at least help finish the season on a high note.
Yeah, I mean, I maybe am like convinced that the idea that Jakob Poeltl's arrival can also help with sort of like the lingering tensions and bad feelings that seem to be hanging over the team. Maybe that's also completely naive. I'm choosing to believe you add a center and it's kind of like energizing everybody because they're playing regular normal basketball that they recognize again. And truthfully, the vibes around the team did seem tangibly better those last few games before the All-Star break. We'll see if that carries through as they get healthy. And speaking of getting healthy, one of the guys set to return, Gary Trent Jr., will be one of the topics of conversation in What's More Likely scenario number 3. It's coming up on the other side. We'll get into the big picture off-season questions and how the next 23 games will determine them. It's coming up in just one sec. Before that, just got to tell you, though, go check out Locked On Leafs, your favorite Toronto Maple Leafs podcast every single day on your favorite podcast apps. It's free. It's wonderful. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morisuti, their reaction episode to Ryan O'Reilly being acquired by the Leafs over the weekend was fantastic, and the Leafs are making a run towards that elusive first-round series victory. Go check out Locked On Leafs as they document it all the way up to the playoffs and beyond on your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube. All right, Big V, let's round this bad boy out, shall we? The final What's More Likely scenario. What's more likely? All 3 of Jakob Poeltl, Fred VanVleet, and Gary Trent Jr. return to the Raptors next season, or only one of them does. I think the consensus idea here is that probably 2 of them coming back, with one of Gary or Fred being featured in a sign and trade in the offseason, is the most likely outcome here. But I'm curious what you think. All 3 of Yak, Fred, or Gary returning versus just one of them returning, who would presumably, you would think, be Jakob Poeltl of that trio, considering they just traded a first-round pick to get him. What are you thinking on this one? What is the more likely outcome?
I will probably go with all 3 returning as opposed to just one. I mean, again, the most likely scenario is 2 of the 3 return. So that being the case, I think 1 out of 3 is pretty unlikely. So I'll go with all 3 coming back. I think, they will be cognizant of the fact that they have had players, especially from that championship team, depart without any real return coming back.
Mm-hmm.
They know that that has generally, outside of that window that you look at, that those championship players, they've done a very good job with asset management
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, being able to sign players back and then eventually trade them. And I think this is probably an opportunity to get back to those ways. And so I will lean towards all three coming back.
Yeah, I think the Raptors tend to want to keep their guys. And I also think there's so much pressure on them not to bungle this offseason that I think bringing all three back is probably more likely than just one. It would be such a cataclysm if only one of those guys comes back. Obviously, there could be
Yeah.
sign and trades and you get stuff back, but sign and trading both of Fred and Gary is going to be hard. I think that's going to be how they move to other teams just because the teams with cap space all reek. They all stink out loud. And so I don't think they're going to be
Except
the
Orlando.
teams. Yeah, they only have 21 million in cap space though. And like, I don't know that
I'm sure they can find a way to free up more money.
I'm sure they could, but I also don't like. Is Fred really going to like Orlando? Really? Like,
I mean,
really?
why is that a really though? Like Paolo
Because this
Banchero,
is a
Franz
team that
Wagner, like,
only likes long, tall weirdos. Has Markelle Fultz, who's playing really good basketball.
yeah.
Like, it just seems like a weird move for a team that's super young, early in their timeline, who's
So
going to
that's more
have to
an
pay
Orlando
guys
thing
very
then,
soon.
not a Fred thing.
I guess, yeah. It doesn't check out or like match up to me as like a reasonable landing spot. Period. Really, especially if they only have 21 million cap space right now. Which again, yes, they can clear more, but it kind of feels like it's an imperfect fit. And I would guess Fred is more likely to return to the Raptors than anything else, or go to the Suns or whatever as their Chris Paul replacement long term. But that's another question for another day. For me, I think because OG is kind of lingering out there as like a potential guy that you trade at the draft, depending on how these next 23 games go, it could also be that the next 23 games kind of make us all remember, oh yeah, OG is really important. He should be part of the team forever. And this changes the conversation. I actually, however, think as much as OG's tied up in this question, I think Scottie Barnes is secretly tied up in this question as well. And it's because of his proclivities to play point guard. That's the position he came out of college branding himself as. He clearly wants to do it. He loves to pass. He loves to have the ball in his hands. And he's really good at it when he decides he wants to be. He's obviously got some limitations as a lead ball handler. He's not much of a shooter. That's going to come back and hurt him unless he can improve upon that. But I'm curious, Big V, like if we get a look, say, at Scottie running the point on second units as sort of the nominal backup point guard here down the stretch, and the Raptors see enough, do you think they would want to go into next season with Scottie Barnes just as the starting point guard? I personally think that would be a terrible idea, putting way too much in a guy way too soon and discrediting the very valuable skills that Fred VanVleet brings to the table. But I'm curious what you think. If Scottie shows out those ball handling chops down the stretch here, does that give them the leeway to say, you know what? Maybe this whole everyone on the floor is tall thing can be taken to a further extreme, and our point guard just is Scottie Barnes going into next season. What say you?
Yeah, I think the Raptors' most likely play is to keep things fluid on the offensive front, where I think they like the idea of Pascal gets his reps, Scottie gets his reps, Fred gets his reps, and you just sort of mix and match depending on the matchups and the flow of the game and all of that kind of stuff. And or if Scottie's got great matchups down low, you just want to get him the ball in the post. That type of stuff, it can change. So I think they'll lean more towards that than having a de facto, this is our guy who's like bringing it up the floor all the time.
Sure. But I mean, like, I guess this is me trying to frame.
And
the
I don't
question
think he's
as,
there in terms of running the half court offense yet either.
No, that's why I think it would be a terrible idea to like cast Fred aside in order to make Scottie the point guard who was promised right away.
Yeah.
As much as I like in theory the concept of a starting lineup of Scottie as your point guard with OG, Gary, Pascal, and Yak, like that. I mean, we're gonna see that lineup, I'm sure, down the stretch here. I'm sure we'll get a look at it and see what it looks like. And there's like enough shooting there. I think you can probably make it work. Not any shooting in your core pick and roll combination if Scottie Poeltl is that, but you have enough shooting and sort of cutting and off ball movement around them to maybe make it work. I just, I guess let me ask you this: if you gave the Raptors truth serum, would they prefer to have Scottie Barnes be their long-term point guard and just have that be the answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue with that question is they are having to recognize reality
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what they want their truth to be,
Yep.
right? And it's
Yep.
like, yeah, they might want their truth to be five guys who look like OG and Pascal on the court at all times.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is showing them that that can't be the case, and that's why they had to go out and get Jakob Poeltl. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think they are, coming around to having these different skill sets, having these different body types, having these different options on the court, which
Versatility? What?
which is what they had when they won the championship and had
Mm-hmm.
success before that, and even after that in that follow-up season. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I think their truth is aligning more with what is tradition now in the NBA, because it's been so long with the three ball and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I do think that if you were to give them the truth serum, they probably would say that, they kind of just like different options at the point as opposed to just like
Mm-hmm.
Scottie full time.
Yeah. No, I think the most important thing here is that they can't devalue what Fred does in the pursuit of, trying to elevate Scottie to where he probably will get at some point down the line.
Well, if
But
there's one thing we know about the Raptors front office is that they don't devalue their own players.
this is true. This is very true. So perhaps some solace to be found there for those a little worried. Lastly, like, where do you think OG factors into this conversation? Obviously, like, if he is in the long-term plans, that's likely going to be the reason one of these guys gets squeezed out. Again, I said yesterday, I'd love to be proven wrong in my assertion that the Raptors should have moved OG at the deadline. I'd love for that to be wrong because I love OG and I think he's awesome. I just, the fit concerns and the offensive overlap and him being kind of overqualified for the role the Raptors need him to play is what's kind of hanging over this. But thoughts on how OG factors into the answer of this question as to who ends up coming back of the three pending UFAs?
Yeah, I think an OG trade in the summer is definitely in play, which is part of why I can see all three coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of rejig the pieces around those guys. And I think that if you're talking to, say, Gary coming off the bench for the remainder of the season, I
Mm-hmm.
think part of the conversation might be that, hey, we see you as a potential starter once again
Mm-hmm.
next season.
Mm-hmm.
And then, is it an OG deal that brings you a stable rotation piece, off the bench, plus a couple picks,
Mm-hmm.
and now you align your salaries better going forward? That might be the move that allows you to bring all three back. And now you're saying, okay, we're kind of back on track in terms of where we want to be going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you mentioned Gary Trent Jr. and man, I'm really excited to watch him play with Yak sort of longer term and just like around the Yak Pascal Scottie trio, right? Like I just feel like he's a perfect dude to slot in along those guys. I know he's not going to start, or I don't think he should start necessarily, but I still think he's going to play heavy minutes. I would imagine he's going to get like 30 minutes a night. I hope he does. He's warranted it the way he's bought in and the way he's played this season. And just like him as the catch and shoot guy, working off of those three very good playmaking and ball handling bigs and forwards, like that's fun to me. I think he's got a real chance to shine in whatever role he occupies here, whether it's running with bench guys, whether it's sprinkling in as a starter, or a guy to close games alongside starter heavy looks. He's fascinating. And if Gary Trent Jr. really does show up, maybe that does kind of inform the OG thing as well. It's a fun, like, look, I know everyone's mad and like, what, playing for what and all this. They traded a first round pick. First of all, I looked yesterday at Jonathan Gavoni's mock draft for 2024. The names in that draft, Bad sports names. You don't want a part of any of those names anyway. Kobe Buffkin? That's not a real guy. What are we talking about here? So not worried about that. The 2024 pick, just screw it. I don't care. Send it to the sun for all I care.
We're officially in the, when you'd play NBA 2K in GM mode for too long, and then you get to like year 2030, and it's like, what are these names?
Yeah, DJ Wagner, Kwame Evans is like gotta be the most made up in year 10 of an NBA 2K franchise name of all time. Not worried about those guys. Of course, sports names are 90% of whether an athlete's going to be good or not. So, yeah, the point is, I know everyone's mad and angry and like confused about the direction of the team. I think the basketball in the final 23 games is kind of going to be a hoot, and watching Yak play with these guys is going to be fun. And there's a certain joy, I think, in the uncertainty of the puzzle and how it all comes together. I find that interesting as someone who's covered a team that's been kind of boring to a fault because they've just been so bloody competent for most of their last 10 years. It's kind of nice to have a little uncertainty, and I think the good basketball will help us inform that uncertainty, make it a little clearer as to what the direction is going to be, and ultimately, they still have Scottie Barnes. They still have Pascal Siakam. They still have, I think, the stuff in place to set themselves up for a pretty good run of success here in the coming years, even though this year has been a bummer. I'm excited for the stretch run. Big V, are you excited for the stretch run? Let's go. Yeah.
I am. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Let's do it. Anything you want to promote for the good people out there before we wrap the show?
Usual stuff, Raptors.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Vivek Jacob. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Hell yeah. I am on Twitter at Woodley Sean. You can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the show for free on your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube. It's always appreciated when you do that. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. Go make your second listen of the day. Locked On NBA Game to Game. It is the nightly recap of all the games featuring the local hosts, yours truly, also involved in that whenever the Raptors are playing a game. It's a great way to catch up on all the games you might have missed the night before as games get back in action tonight. Locked On NBA Game to Game on the Locked On NBA YouTube channel. Go check it out. We'll be back again tomorrow with Jamar Hines to break down Raptors Pelicans, and then I will be jet setting off to Detroit and Cleveland for the weekend games. That should be a ton of fun as well. We'll round it there. Bye-bye. Have a good one.